when I was 16 years old, McDonald's had a special deal going on. Hamburgers were 29 cents on Wednesday, and cheeseburgers were 39 cents on Sunday. Anybody remember that in here? Just me? I was the only one with my life changed that time. Okay. So basically, I have an ad up here if you need the reminder there. That's what it looked like. And so basically, they placed a limit on you if you were going to buy these things because they were so cheap that you could only order 10 at a time. All right? Now, the reason that this story matters is because I used to play roller hockey on Sundays for my high school team. All right? So here's actually a picture of me from the yearbook. Or of us as a hockey team. I'm not going to show you where I was. If you can find it, great, but if not, you're on your own. What I really want to show you in this picture, though, is not me, but it's this guy down here, Nader Ali. He was our club president. So you see, he was actually voted as captain of our hockey team that year, not because he was our best player, although he was very, very good, but more because he had really great leadership ability. See, where we were in California, roller hockey is not a CIF-sanctioned sport, so it's not an official sport. So we had to bring it together as a club, so we had to compete against other schools' clubs around the area. And so Nader did all the work to put that together. He also did a whole bunch of work to try to get the school to pay for our jerseys, which I actually brought. Now, this has been sitting in my shed in a tub for years, and Tosh has been trying to get me to throw this away for like decades. And I'm like, no, because you never know when you're going to need it. She's like, you haven't touched that thing in 20 years. And I'm like, I've been holding it so I could have a sermon illustration someday, apparently. So here it is, right? Now, the reason that I'm bringing this out to show you is because you can tell that this color is blue, right? Well, our school colors were red and yellow. And the reason we had blue jerseys was because they wouldn't give us any money. And so Nader, we paid for it, and he bought blue ones as a protest to say our school won't even buy us jerseys. So, now, anyway, Nader was a great leader, and he was a great guy, all right? And one day, he decided he wanted to motivate his goalie to play a little bit better, which was me. And so he said, goalie, if you get a shutout this year, I will buy you 20 cheeseburgers from McDonald's. Now, nothing in life motivates me quite like food, so I agreed to the deal, all right? And that very game, I shut out the other team. So he owed me 20 cheeseburgers. Now, like I said, there was a 10 cheeseburger limit, so he bought half of what he owed me. He brought 10 cheeseburgers to me the next game. So I was like, great, he still owes me 10 more. He said, goalie, that was awesome. He said, matter of fact, every game this year, every time you get a shutout, I will buy you 20 cheeseburgers. So the very next game, I got a shutout again. So now he owed me 30 cheeseburgers. Now, in total, that was about $16 worth of cheeseburgers at the time, okay, from McDonald's. Now, that may not sound like a lot today, but to a high school kid in the year 2000, it was a lot of money, all right? Minimum wage was like $6 an hour, okay? So, now, we still had the whole rest of the season to play, and he said, goalie, dude, the deal is off. I can't afford to be buying you 20 cheeseburgers every time you get a shutout. Now, for the rest of our high school career, I would tease him and say, Nader, you owe me 30 cheeseburgers. Now, the last time I saw Nader in person was when I was at a party when I was about 20 years old, okay? And I haven't seen him since. So fast forward to this year, okay? It's been 24 years since we made the deal. Still, I'm waiting on 30 cheeseburgers. All right, if you're following along with the sermon notes this morning, today's message is called Elisha Part 2. We're going to be in the book of 2 Kings. And before we hop into the text, I'm going to give you guys a bit of a recap. So we've been looking at the prophets of God in the nation of Israel. That's what our series is about right now. Now, God has been working through prophets in his nation, but Israel has split into two kingdoms at this point, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And in the north, there is a wicked king named Ahab who is on the throne. By the way, if you've been paying attention the last 3 weeks, you might notice that I keep referring to Ahab as being the king of Judah. He's actually the king of Israel, okay? So, which is a little embarrassing, but I figured I needed to let you guys know. Anyway, he had an equally wicked wife, if not worse, a lady named, what? Jezebel, right? Now, Jezebel is from north of Israel, from the region of Tyre and Sidon, where they worship the god Baal. Okay? Now, she did a lot of work to bring Baal worship down into Israel and to push out the Israelite, the one true God. Okay? Now, God, however, is responding to Jezebel bringing Baal worship in by using a prophet named Elijah. Okay? Now, Elijah brought on a severe drought, and then he challenged the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, and he killed them all. And then when Jezebel heard about it, she said that her life's goal was going to be to kill Elijah. Okay? So Elijah went into hiding, and God had him call on a new prophet named Elisha, just to keep us confused, because now there's Elijah, and Elisha, okay? Now last week we learned that Elisha studied under Elijah for about 7 to 8 years, okay? But ultimately Elijah was taken into heaven in a whirlwind, and Elisha took over the mission. So now he was the prophet of Israel. However, there was a bunch of disrespect and stuff going on, so it kept him from getting moving, all right? And that's where we left off. Now today, we're going to fast forward into a little bit of time, and we're going to see how things go for him. Now back in 1 Kings 22, it's important to realize that King Ahab was actually killed in a battle against the Syrians, all right? And his son, Ahaziah, took over in his place, and then he leads Israel right back down into more Baal worship, all right? But he ends up dying as well, right before Elijah was taken up in the whirlwind, and then his brother Jehoram takes over as king, okay? Now the big problem here is that Jehoram is king, but good old mommy dearest, Jezebel, is still alive and pushing things from behind the curtains, okay? So now as Elisha starts his ministry, he starts out as kind of a chaplain. All right? He's very involved in the military and the political stuff that's going on, not just in Israel, but also in Syria, okay? So this is a very mobile, militaristic and political type of prophet, okay? Serving all of the people of Israel and Syria. Now, as he's doing all sorts of military things, there's one story that really stands out, okay? So we're going to hop into the story about a guy named Naaman, all right? We're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1. It says this. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Okay, so this term mighty man of valor, you see it a couple times in Scripture, but it's only reserved for very special men. We got guys like Jeroboam, David, Gideon, okay? These are the mighty men of valor. However, it's interesting that Naaman is called a mighty man of valor, and it's interesting because he's the only Gentile that is called that in Scripture. Now, one reason that might be is because Jewish legend tells us that he was actually the very soldier that God used to kill Ahab, all right? But he had a big problem in that he was also a leper. All right? Now, if you don't know what leprosy is, it's a horrible disease where people's bodies virtually just rot away until they die. Okay? It's a terrible, miserable life that leads to a terrible, miserable, painful death. Now, Naaman had captured an Israelite girl during one of his campaigns, and she was serving his wife. And one day she says, hey, Naaman should go talk to that prophet that we used to have in Samaria in Israel, because I think he can cure leprosy. Now, that's a pretty big promise to make, right? Curing leprosy. That's a big deal. And so Naaman's wife tells Naaman about this, and here's what he does, 2 Kings 5:5. And the king of Syria said, go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. So now Israel and Judah have both been having problems with Syria. They keep fighting, all right? And so now Naaman, who is a Syrian fighter, is now going to go ask his enemies, the Israelites, to heal him. Why would he do that? Well, maybe this was during peacetime, so he thought that if he threatened them, he could get away with it. Or maybe he was favored for killing Ahab, and so he thought that the Israelites would then want to help him. Or maybe money talks. That's kind of what I think was going on here. Notice all the stuff that he's bringing as a gift, right? The changes of clothing, the shekels with silver, all that type of stuff. It's worth somewhere in the neighborhood of about $2 million today. Okay, so he's going to show up and pay his enemies $2 million. Now tell me this. If a guy from ISIS came in and said, hey dude, I'll give you $2 million to give me some of your antibiotics, you think most people in America would just give him the antibiotics for $2 million? Even if they're their enemy? I think most people would. Like, yeah, I don't like you, but $2 million is $2 million. Okay? So he's thinking, well, if I go in here and offer him $2 million, they might give me what I want. So let's find out what happens next. 2 Kings 5:6. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, when this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy. And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and he said, "Am I God to kill and make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Only consider and see how he's seeking a quarrel with me." So basically this letter says, from king to king, I'm sending my buddy to you to be healed of leprosy. And King Jehoram is like, dang it, and he tears his robes, and he's like, this king is just sending me an impossible task, right? So that then he'll have a reason to pick a fight with me. It's like a mobster saying, hey, heal my guy of pancreatic cancer right now, and if you don't, you'll be sleeping with the fishes because you won't help me. It's an impossible situation. And Jehoram is like, I would help, I would love to heal him of leprosy, but this is impossible. So he's thinking this is clearly just a ploy, right? He's giving me something impossible so he can say I didn't do what he asked to give him a reason to attack me. So Jehoram's freaked out. Let's see how Elisha reacts when he hears about this. 2 Kings 5:8. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel." So basically, he says, come on, Jehoram, why are you freaking out? Right? No, you can't do this. Yes, this is impossible, but nothing is impossible with God. Let's give God a chance to work here before you panic, okay? So that gives us our first fill in the blank this morning. If you grabbed your Connect card on the way in, you're filling in your blanks. Here's your first one. Never discount God in a trial. Never discount God in a trial. Anything that's going on in your life that might be hard, you always have to leave God some room to work. See, so Elisha sees this problem, but he remembers that God is awesome and he can do anything. So he says, go ahead and send him to me and let's see how God is going to work this out. All right? Let's go to 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 9. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times and your flesh shall be restored and you shall be clean." Now this is interesting. Elisha doesn't even bother to go down. He just sends someone down to meet him at the door. Right, so this big, powerful military man bangs on the door. Blam, blam, blam. "It's me, Naaman." And the messenger's like, "Yeah, what do you want?" "I'm here to be healed." "Okay, cool. Go dip in the Jordan 7 times and you'll be fine." Clink. Right? What? All right, well, let's see how Naaman responds to this. 2 Kings 5:11. But Naaman was angry, and he went away, saying, "Behold, I thought that he would surely come out and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper." He says, "What? I'm Naaman, dude. Don't you know who I am? I came all the way down here to give you gifts, and you send a messenger to the door? You don't even come yourself? And then you just dismiss me like that? And then you tell me to go bathe in that nasty Jordan?" He says, "The rivers in Syria are better than that nasty old thing. If I just wanted to try to wash myself, I would bathe up there. Why am I going to come down here and get in the Jordan?" So then he says, "I thought you were going to come out and make a big show and wave your hands and call on the name of your God, and then I would be clean. But you didn't do that, so now I'm angry. And I'm not going to listen." Well, here's what we need to learn from this here, church. Your next fill in the blank. God often doesn't work how we think he should. God often doesn't work how we think he should. Now, fortunately for Naaman, the servant speaks reason to him. Okay? He says, "Sir, the Jordan is right there. Let's just give it a shot. What do we have to lose?" See, Naaman's struggling because he wants this to be done his way. Now, Spurgeon, when he talks about this, he says that Naaman had to fight 2 enemies that day. First, his proud self, right, because he demanded that Elisha come and serve him, but then also his evil questioning because he didn't like receiving the instructions he received. "No, I want this to go my way. I want you to come down and respect me and do this my way." That's his expectation. In church, we have to be careful that we don't fall into that same trap because sometimes we have those same expectations of God. Right? "God, you're going to do this my way. God, I don't want you to tell me to do something different. I don't want you to change me. I want you to change your plans to fit what I'm doing." So we have to be careful we don't fall into that trap because if we do that, we quickly get pulled out of seeing God do awesome things. All right, so let's see what happens next. 2 Kings 5:14. So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Wow. So he gets out and his skin is like the flesh of a little child. That's pretty incredible, church. Now, can you imagine this war-torn soldier, right? I mean, he's like covered in scars, he's got scabs, and he's all leathery from being out in the sun, right? Not to mention the fact that his skin is rotting and peeling from his body because of leprosy. And suddenly he comes out of the Jordan with skin as smooth as a baby's bottom. That's how God handled it. Now, it's clear, church, that Naaman would walk out of there a man who was changed for the better for the rest of his life. But when I say that, I'm not talking about his leprosy. I'm talking about a change in his heart. Watch this, 2 Kings 5:15. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and he came and stood before him, and he said, Behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servant. But he said, As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. So Naaman is like, wow, Israel's God is real. And then he says, I don't even know how to respond. Elisha, take some money. Take my stuff that I brought. And Elisha's like, no, dude, I didn't do it for the money. As a matter of fact, I didn't even do it. It was God that did it. And this is very important because he wants to make sure that there is no confusion about him like fulfilling messianic prophecy. Right? Like, no, this was God. This was not me. And Naaman ends up saying, you know what then? I'm going to end up worshiping the God of Israel alone. Matter of fact, he ends up taking a bunch of dirt from Israel back with him. And the reason that he wants to do that is because back then they believed that gods were kind of tied to the lands that they were connected with. So he was the God of Israel. So he thought, if I take some dirt from Israel, then God will come with me. And I can worship him all my days, and he will be able to be there for me, and we can have some kind of a relationship. And it's interesting because that's a very different perspective than what he had when he came down, right? He came in saying, this prophet's going to do everything my way. I'm going to come to you, you're going to wave your hands, I'll be healed, I'll pay you, and then it's over, I get to go back. But it didn't go that way at all. Because God is so cool that he just does things differently. He does things in ways we don't expect. You know, oftentimes God's blessings are right there, and we just miss them. Even in the middle of us complaining, God is still doing wonderful things. And here Elisha is showing Naaman that God is the provider and he doesn't need anything from us. That's a very important message, church, that Elisha doesn't take credit for this, that God gets the credit. But that lesson almost gets lost because of a guy named Gehazi. Now, Gehazi is a very fun name to say. Everybody say Gehazi. Gehazi. All right. Now, Gehazi works for Elisha, and he saw all this go down. He saw the whole situation. He sees that Elisha doesn't take any money from Naaman, and Gehazi is like, what? He turned down $2 million? What is he thinking? So he decides he's going to come up with a plan. He's going to follow Naaman, and then when they get a ways out, he's going to run up to him, and he's going to say, hey, Elisha wants some money after all. I'll take it back to him for you. That's basically his plan. Okay? And then, of course, he's going to keep it for himself. So he runs up, he catches Naaman, and Naaman turns around, he's like, hey, what's up? Is everything okay? And here's what happened, 2 Kings 5:22. And he said, all is well. My master has sent me to say that there have just now come to me from the hill country of Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing. Now, church, is that true? No, it is not true. Elisha intentionally took nothing so God would get the credit, and now Gehazi is ruining that testimony by trying to lie for his own gain, to make Naaman think, oh, I did have to pay for what I got. Now, I think Gehazi is probably justifying it in his head. I'm only asking for a little bit, right? I only want like $150,000. I'm not asking for the whole $2 million. But then the problem is Naaman turns to him and he says, oh, this is what you want? He says, I'll give you twice that. So now his lie just got bigger. So then Gehazi takes the stuff and he hides it and he runs back and he runs into Elisha. But Elijah knows what's going on. Hello, prophet, right? So Elisha says, hey, where'd you go, Gehazi? Where you been? And he's like, nowhere. I've been here the whole time. Well, here's what happened, 2 Kings 5:26. But he said to him, did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male servants and female servants? Therefore the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever. And so he went out from his presence a leper like snow. Elisha says, my guy, I know you're lying. You went out and you took all that stuff. Was it time for that? No, it was not. Because I was making a testimony about God that this was his power, and you took the money, so guess what? You get leprosy for yourself now. And your descendants, by the way. Now, to some of us, that might seem a little bit harsh, but the truth is that God was in the midst of trying to spread his own name to Syria. Naaman is going back to Syria, and he's going to say, guess what? The God of Israel, he's legit. But now, he's going to go back and say, well, I had to pay his prophet for it. Right? Because Elisha's nothing but a televangelist that wants to ask for money after he does healings. The testimony is being ruined because of Gehazi's selfishness. That's a big deal, church. So here's your next fill in the blank. Do not put God's mission aside for your own goals. Do not put God's mission aside for your own goals. See, Gehazi was more interested in his own personal gain than he was in sharing the hope of God with a nation that needed to hear about it. See, we have to be careful, church, that we don't make that same mistake. Did you realize that if you're married, your marriage is supposed to be a picture of Christ and his church? Do you treat it that way? You know, the Bible says that we're all supposed to be ambassadors for Christ. Do you live your life that way when you leave your house? As if you're Christ's ambassador? You know, the Bible tells us that we're supposed to surrender to Christ as our master. Have you surrendered, or do you still just want to do everything your way? See, God is a God who always follows through. Makes me think of my 30 cheeseburgers. Wondering if it's ever going to happen. Okay, so now what's going to happen here is we're going to jump forward. We're going to see a little bit more of a very important event, okay? We're going to see how God follows through now, okay, in the story of Elisha. So we're going to fast forward. King Jehoram is now very sick, and Elisha sends one of his guys with some oil to anoint a new king, okay? But he's kind of got to do this secretly. So he says, find Jehu, take him to a back room, and then he says, anoint him, and then get the heck out of there. Okay? Because the current king doesn't want some other king to be anointed, right? He probably wants his own sons to carry on. Or at least one of his family members. He definitely doesn't want Jehu, because Jehu's going to start off as a good king. Okay? So Ahab's descendants don't want that, all right? Now, if you'll remember when Elijah was complaining, back in Elijah's story, he was like, well, everything's horrible. I may as well die because, Jezebel's winning and, God, nobody worships God anymore. And God says, dude, go back to work. He says, anoint Elisha as a prophet, anoint Hazael as a king over Syria, and then anoint Jehu as king over Israel. That's what God told Elijah to do. Well, now we're going to see God fulfill that kingly anointing of Jehu by using Elisha. Okay? So let's go to 2 Kings 9:6 and see how this goes. So he arose and went into the house, and the young man poured the oil on his head, saying to him, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I anoint you king over the people of the Lord over Israel. And you shall strike down the house of Ahab your master, so that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free, in Israel. And I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Ahijah. And the dogs shall eat Jezebel and the territory of Jezreel, and none shall bury her. Then he opened the door and fled. Notice that whole thing about the dogs eating Jezebel and no one can bury her. That's important, all right? So Jehu goes into the back room. This prophet runs up to him and he's like, hey, you're going to be king now. I got to go. Takes off running. And now everybody who was in the palace looks and they're like, hey, Jehu, what did that crazy guy want? And Jehu's like, well, I guess I'm king now. And then all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, he's king? Get the trumpets. And they blow the trumpets and they're making the announcements and guys come out, hear ye, hear ye. I guess Jehu's the king now. So it's like, oh, well, now we have a new king, I guess. He's been anointed through the prophets of God. So what happens then? Well, now that Jehu is king, Jehoram, the old king, approaches him. And he's like, hey, Jehu, is everything cool? Are we going to be peaceful here? And Jehu's like, no, not as long as your mama is alive. And so he takes out a bow and arrow and shoots him in the back, right? And then Ahaziah, who's from Judah, is there too. And he's like, hey, shoot him too. And they shoot him. Blam. And then Jehu heads straight to the palace because he's going to take care of Jezebel. And so he gets to the palace, and Jezebel's hanging out the window. And she goes, hey, Jehu, is there peace, you murderer? If that's not the pot calling the kettle black, right? Jezebel calling somebody a murderer. And Jehu doesn't even respond. He just yells up into her window, hey, is there anybody in there who's on my side? And a couple of guys poke their head out the window. Yeah? He says, hey, toss her out the window. 2 Kings 9:33. He said, throw her down. So they threw her down. And some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, and they trampled on her. Ding dong, the witch is dead. Okay? God's judgment finally came for Jezebel. It finally came. Jezebel is gone. Jezebel, whose name means, if you'll remember, dedicated to Baal. God has finally had victory over her. Which should tell us something, church. Your next fill in the blank. God always follows through. God always follows through. Church, we see that through the entire Bible. Honestly, every time I make these fill in the blanks, if you go back through the fill in the blanks I've given you over the last year, you've probably seen that very same fill in the blank. God always follows through 10 times. Because we see it in every story. God follows through. And here Jehu says, okay, we have to bury her because she's a queen. Now remember what happened when he was anointed. They said, the dogs are going to eat her, and you're not going to bury her. But Jehu says, bury her because she's a queen. But then they come back and they say, hey, guess what? We can't find her body parts. All that's left is her skull, her feet, and her hands. And so that prophecy comes true. 2 Kings 9:36. When they came back and told him, he said, this is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel, the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as dung on the face of the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say, this is Jezebel. So it worked, church. From Elijah to Elisha to Jehu, God has finally fulfilled his promise that he would take care of her. And Ahab and Jezebel and their whole family is now officially wiped off the map. God has done what he said he would do. Now after this, Elisha actually goes on to serve for another 50 years after this event. Now there are hundreds of sermons that could be written about the life of Elisha, but church, we only have time for 2. And so the way that we're going to close out his life is a beautiful picture, and it takes place at his death. All right, 2 Kings 13:14. Now when Elisha had fallen sick with the illness of which he was to die, Joash, king of Israel, went down to him and wept before him, crying, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. Anybody recognize that line? We saw it last week. That's the same thing that Elisha said when Elijah was taken up in the whirlwind. And now Joash is saying it to Elisha. Well, this tells us a little bit of something. Elisha loved Elijah, and Joash loved Elisha. So here's your next fill in the blank. Your legacy matters. Now, Joash was actually a wicked king, but even that wicked king appreciated the godliness and the goodness of Elisha. Matter of fact, Charles Spurgeon put it this way. He said, dear friends, let us seek so to live that even ungodly men may miss us when we're gone. I think that's good motivation. I think that's a good lesson for us to learn as the church. And so for Elisha, he's getting ready to depart the world, and Joash is scared, which makes sense because not only is Joash losing a friend in Elisha, but also he's wondering who's going to be the intermediary between me and God because I'm an evil king and he doesn't like me very much, and Elisha's been my guy. Well, Elisha offers him a little bit of encouragement. He grabs a bow and arrow, and they go over to the window, and they both hold the bow, and they shoot the arrow together. Okay? Now, Scripture tells us that the arrows that get shot symbolize the deliverance of Israel, right? The arrows go, and it's the working of God. Once it's released, there's nothing you can do about it, right? The arrow is doing its own thing. And Elisha is essentially saying, it doesn't matter who holds the bow. The deliverance is coming whether I'm holding the bow or you're holding the bow, which tells us that God's work is always going to go forth because it's not about us doing it. God can use anyone he pleases. 2 Kings 13:20. So Elisha died, and they buried him. Now bands of Moabites used to invade the land in the spring of the year. And as the man was being buried, behold, a marauding band was seen, and the man was thrown into the grave of Elisha. And as soon as the man touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood on his feet. And so, church, what we see there is that God continues to move through Elisha's actions, even though Elisha is not there anymore. Which brings me back to your last fill in the blank, which was that your legacy matters. That's why. Because things go on after we're gone, church. But the work that you've done, the lessons you've taught, the people that you've invested in, they go on. And then their kids and the people they invest in go on. So you have an impact with your life that goes on beyond you. And so hopefully we're all striving to do good in this life and leave good things behind as well. So what do you want your legacy to be? We're often so focused on the here and the now. And I want this and I want it quickly, but the truth is, church, God is always moving. Now, God may not always be in a hurry, but God is always moving. He's very persistent. And that reminds me of something, church. I want to tell you about this. The other day I was on Instagram and I saw a post from a guy named Nader Ali. And that's the post right there. He lives in Irvine now, and he just started playing hockey again. And so I watched the highlight of him playing, and I thought, dang, that ain't bad for a 40-year-old guy. He's moving around pretty good. And so I commented and said, hey, man, you still got it. By the way, you still owe me 30 cheeseburgers. And he says, send me your address in a day that you want them. And I said, LOL, the last thing I need is more cheeseburgers. Plus, they're not 39 cents like they used to be back in the day. And he says, doesn't matter, bet's a bet, give me your address. So then he sends me a message, and we're chatting, and I'm like, all right, dude, let's do this. So we have an elder dinner last week, or the next week, it was a couple weeks ago, and he set up DoorDash to bring us 30 cheeseburgers from McDonald's. And so we're sitting there, and we're sitting there, and we're sitting there, and the burgers don't show up. And I'm getting a little embarrassed and hungry. And I'm like, dude, what's going on? And I'm like, is he messing with me? Like, is he mad that, like, I've been bugging him about this for 20 years, 24 years, and hasn't happened? And so I'm sending him messages. He's not responding. And so, like, towards the end of our meeting, it's like, guys, let's just go to Culver's. So we all went to Culver's, and it was fine. So the next day, he sends me a message. He's like, dude, I'm sorry. I was still at work when you were messaging me. And he says, my bank thought that there was fraud because I was setting up a DoorDash in Illinois, and I live in California. He's like, I didn't know. I'm sorry. So he's like, all right, let's do this again. So we had staff lunch the next week. And so this time we share phone numbers so I can actually message him on the phone. And he swears that the burgers are going to be there. In church, this is what a 24-year-old bet looks like, or a deal. Pretty cool, right? Pretty cool. Nader, if you're watching, thanks so much again, man. And I'm sorry that a $16 promise turned into a $72 plus tax and delivery thing to fulfill. But you know what, church? When I think about what just happened there, it makes me think of God, and it tells me that follow-through is really, really, really important, even if it takes a little while. Because God often takes his time following through too, and we tend to get frustrated because we want what we want and we want it now. But God's view of time is very different from our own. He's not motivated to get things done quickly because he's tired or lazy. He doesn't feel those things, right? And so it's good for us to remember that when we start becoming impatient, that it's okay for us to wait on God and to trust that he's going to follow through eventually.